Europe just put 140 billion euros on the table for Ukraine. No American money, no Washington strings, Germany and its allies alone. NATO's Secretary General says European defense spending is up $258 billion across 2 years. The message to Putin from Germany's foreign minister was direct. You will not win this on the battlefield. Now, prove it. NATO allies are preparing to hand Ukraine one of its largest financial lifelines yet, with Germany confirming a pledge worth 140 billion euros, or roughly $160 billion, over the next 2 years. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul revealed the figure on July 7th, telling Deutschlandfunk Radio that the funding would come entirely from European nations and Canada, with no contribution from Washington.
We can commit 140 billion euros to Ukraine for 2026 and next year, drawn solely from European and Canadian contributions. This will be a very strong signal of support to Ukraine.
The announcement lands just as NATO leaders gather in Ankara for a 2-day summit, where European spending has taken centre stage. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte opened proceedings with a note of confidence, pointing to projections that European allies and Canada will invest $258 billion more in defence across 2025 and 2026 than in prior years.
Last year alone, European allies and Canada spent nearly 20% more on defence than the year before. An extra $139 billion. Looking at 2025 and 2026 together, it is an increase, again, Canada and the Europeans, of $258 billion, more than $250 billion.
Behind the numbers sits a familiar source of tension. Washington has spent months pressing European capitals to spend more, with US President Trump repeatedly branding allied budgets inadequate. That pressure reportedly extended to a private call on July 3rd, when Chancellor Friedrich Merz corrected Trump directly after the president dismissed Germany's defense spending as outdated online.
According to our projections, by next year, the alliance will have the capacity to produce around 4 million artillery shells annually. Almost twice as many as last year. That's scale. So yes, we have made real progress. We are moving in the right direction. The strategy is clear.
Berlin, for its part, is moving fast. Merz has pledged to double Germany's defense budget within 4 years, well ahead of NATO's original 2035 deadline, with the 2027 draft budget alone calling for a 30% jump to nearly 110 billion euros. Back on the Ukraine funding, Wadephul framed the pledge as more than financial support. He argued Kyiv's recent battlefield gains, striking deeper into Russian territory, proved that sustained backing is shifting the balance of the war. He was equally direct about what comes next, calling on Moscow to accept that the war cannot be won by force. Referencing talks held in London in June between Merz, Emmanuel Macron, and Keir Starmer, he said Europe remains ready to negotiate, but only on realistic terms.
Now it is up to Vladimir Putin to finally understand that he will not win this conflict on the battlefield, but that negotiations are the appropriate course of action.
With the Ankara summit still underway, attention now turns to whether allies can turn these pledges into signed commitments before it closes. Europe is quietly preparing for a future without the United States at the center of NATO, as fears grow over Washington's long-term commitment to the alliance. Behind closed doors, European officials are advancing contingency plans to ensure the continent can defend itself using NATO's existing structures, even if the US withdraws forces or refuses to respond in a crisis. The effort, informally dubbed European NATO, aims to shift more command and operational responsibilities to European members while preserving deterrence against Russia. The urgency has intensified following repeated threats by US President Donald Trump to exit the alliance, including recent remarks suggesting NATO was no longer reliable. His comments, alongside disputes over Europe's stance on conflicts such as Iran, have deepened concerns across European capitals. A key turning point has come from Germany. Long resistant to reducing reliance on the US, Berlin is now backing efforts to strengthen European defense autonomy under Chancellor Friedrich Merz. This marks a significant policy shift, unlocking broader support from countries including France, the UK, Poland, and Nordic states.
A burden shifting from the US toward Europe is ongoing, and it will continue as part of the US defense and national security strategy.
European leaders stress that the goal is not to replace NATO, but to make it more resilient and less dependent on American leadership. However, the challenges are substantial. The alliance's command structure, intelligence systems, and nuclear deterrence are heavily reliant on US capabilities, many of which cannot be quickly replicated.
The most important thing is to understand that it's taking place, and also to do it in a very managed and controllable way, instead of the US just quickly pulling out.
Efforts are now focused on boosting defense production, expanding military capabilities, and even reconsidering conscription in some countries. Still, gaps remain, particularly in intelligence and nuclear protection, where Europe continues to depend on US support. For now, Europe is not replacing NATO, but it is preparing for a scenario where it may have to lead it alone. It started with a war, and it may end with an alliance. Trump has told The Telegraph he is strongly considering pulling the United States out of NATO. Not as a negotiating tactic, not as a campaign threat, but as a direct consequence of what he calls a betrayal during his war on Iran. His words were blunt.
Oh yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger, and Putin knows that too, by the way.
A few days ago, Trump called NATO a paper tiger and said that he is disappointed with the organization.
Don't want to get dragged into their wars either. You know? It's one thing, we're very disappointed, I'll say it publicly, we're very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing. And I've always said, 25 years ago, I mean, I was somebody that wasn't a politician, but I was always involved in politics and I understood politics. I said 25 years ago that NATO's a paper tiger, but more importantly, that we'll come to their rescue, but they will never come to ours. And I want you to remember that we said this. They didn't come to our rescue.
The breaking point was the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has effectively closed the waterway for weeks, through which 20% of the world's oil typically flows, sending energy prices spiraling and threatening a global recession. Trump demanded NATO allies send warships to reopen it. They refused, and Trump has not forgotten.
Beyond not being there, it was actually hard to believe. I just think it should be automatic.
It is the same logic he applied to Ukraine that America shows up, and allies don't. Now he's drawing a line. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had already signaled where this was heading. Speaking on Fox News, he called NATO a one-way street and accused allies of denying the US access to military bases during the Iran conflict.
So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO and that alliance for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make, and he'll have to make it. We're going to finish the job here. As I said, we're very, very close to achieving our objectives on all of these things that I've outlined. But I do think, unfortunately, we are going to have to re-examine whether or not this alliance that has served this country well for a while is still serving that purpose, or is it now become a one-way street where America is simply in a position to defend Europe, but when we need the help of our allies, they're going to deny us basing rights and they're going to deny us overflight?
Trump said he was glad Rubio made those comments. Britain got its own rebuke. Trump singled out Prime Minister Keir Starmer for refusing to join the American-Israeli war against Iran, then questioned whether the Royal Navy was even capable. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, when asked about Trump saying he was strongly considering pulling the United States out of NATO, said he would act in the country's interest, whatever the noise.
Firstly, NATO is the single most effective military alliance the world has ever seen. And it has kept us safe for many decades, and we are fully committed to NATO. Secondly, that whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make. And that's why I've been absolutely clear that this is not our war, and we're not going to get dragged into it.
So what actually happens if the US walks out? NATO doesn't vanish overnight, but it becomes a fundamentally different organization. The US contributes roughly 70% of NATO's total defense spending and provides the nuclear umbrella that makes Article 5, the Attack One, Attack All guarantee, credible. Without Washington, that guarantee becomes a promise Europe cannot keep alone. The countries most exposed are Poland and the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, sitting closest to Russia, having joined NATO precisely because of Russia. A US exit doesn't just weaken its security, it rewrites their reality. And Moscow would know exactly what it means. Putin, whom Trump himself acknowledged knows NATO is a paper tiger, would likely read a US withdrawal as the greatest strategic gift since the Cold War ended. Europe would be forced into a scramble, rearmament, bilateral deals, and a rushed attempt to build autonomous defence. France and the UK would try to anchor something. Germany would face its most consequential military decisions since 1945. Congress has passed legislation making unilateral withdrawal difficult. The legal and political resistance would be enormous. But the signal alone, a US president calling NATO a paper tiger and meaning it, has already changed the conversation. The alliance has held Europe at peace for over 75 years. What Trump is now describing isn't a renegotiation. It's a rupture, and Putin is already taking notes.